and south. It'll be warm and humid with top temperatures of 18 to 24 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Thanks to Screwfix.ie. Championing the trade with a choice of over 20,000 quality trade products.
Welcome back. So they're underway at Newbridge and Rory McIlroy is striding towards the first tee in Carnoustie, and we're going to review the Sunday Papers for the next hour or so. We have two underachieving types in the studio, Gary O'Toole, Olympian and orthopaedic surgeon, and Jack Anderson, Professor and Director of Sports Law at Melbourne Law School, and writes columns for The Examiner. Lads, where did it all go wrong in your lives, do you feel?
Thanks very much, Joe. You've never played golf, neither of us. That's the secret. Secret to success.
Yeah, no doubt. The headline, so Sunday Independent, we have, golf's on a lot of the back pages actually. It's rare enough it happens, but it's happening this weekend. Spieth wary as wind change threatens high drama. That's the wind, obviously, is into them on the back nine. Spieth going out the leader. Interestingly, left-hand side, a lot of the papers have this on their back pages. GPA increased pressure on GAA to allow the Miller game. GPA releasing a statement effectively saying that they don't feel this decision is in line with our values as sports people and it should be revisited. And then Dublin march towards history. Obviously Dublin winning against Tyrone last night at Healy Park. Back page of the Mail on Sunday. Again, that Liam Miller story rumbles on. GAA ready to make Porky Queeve U-turn. So it seems the GAA are ready to go with the crowd on this one. There's a meeting planned, it seems, with the DG Tom Ryan and John Horn, the president, with representatives of the core committee who were involved in the Liam Miller match. And then on the road to glory, Dublin reaffirmed credentials with gritty win in Omagh last night. Sunday Times has Jordan Spieth on their front page. American Idol. Jordan Spieth has sights on back-to-back open wins as 3 US stars top Carnoustie leaderboard. Bottom left, Dublin books spot in semi-finals, and then it seems Chelsea and Bayern both want Anthony Martial, and it seems Jose Mourinho is happy to let him go. Back page of the Sunday World, left-hand corner, you have Route 66 for Rory, which is the score Rory McIlroy is targeting today if he wants to catch Jordan Spieth. And then Dublin get one for the road. Again, Dublin 114 to Tyrone's 14 points on the back page of the Sunday World. Sunday People. When was the last time golf was on the back page of the Sunday People? American Idol George, a cut above. That's Jordan Spieth, obviously. Sunday Mirror, again, it's Jordan Spieth. Cream of the crop. Spieth's on top after close shave at Barber. That's Jordan Spieth, who, if you didn't see yesterday, spent his morning before he shot a 65 at the Open to lead, wandering around Carnoustie looking for a haircut. In the end, he found a barber who didn't know who he was. He paid £9 for the haircut and tipped him another 11. So that was the story of Jordan Spieth's morning, hence the headlines. Tiger on their tails, leading US trio not out of the woods. So Tiger thrilling everyone yesterday, looking to add to his 14 majors. And then again, it's Tiger and a reference to Jordan Spieth's hair. Sean Spieth versus Hero Tiger. That works better in print than me reading it, I think. And McStay on the sideline. Yeah, Kevin McStay reckons the Sun is facing a 12-week ban. He appeared to shove linesman Niall Cullen. It was of the Diarmuid Connolly variety. There wasn't much in it if you haven't seen it, but he certainly had his hands on the linesman. And then pitch hunt. So you may have seen during the week that in Healy Park they narrowed the pitch, and Mickey Hart afterwards said that was actually not a Tyrone decision to try and make life more difficult for the Dubs, but in fact it was Sky Sports who needed more clearance on the sideline for their technology. So that's Hart. It had nothing to do with us. So they are your Sunday papers. We'll get to the golf, which is ongoing. There's lots in the papers in the golf. There's a piece on Sam Warburton, who's retired. There's dilemma facing Team Sky. There's some athletics pieces. Very nice interview with Shane McGrath, Frank Greeley, Leon Reid in the Sunday Times, as well as a character you're interested in, Jack. Eamon Sweeney's writing about Conor McGregor and Putin. But we might just start with the GAA generally. There's the Liam Miller side of the saga, and then less of a saga, but it's the criticism of the game and the Super 8s, which is very strong today, particularly in the Sunday Independent. The Liam Miller situation, I think everyone's familiar with it as stands. The headline grabbing stuff is that the GPA have weighed in, Jack.
Yeah, the GPA is the latest of a range of, if you like, GA stakeholders to have come in. But also, it seemed last night that there was an announcement that the GA authorities were going to meet the organising committee. And I think initially, and it's mentioned in some of the papers as well, that there was a feeling that the event would take place in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, but now that seems to have been rolled back from, and it's just a meeting between the Director General and the President of the GAA. It's going to be, it's an interesting one, and the papers, particularly Philip Lanigan in the Irish Mail on Sunday, makes reference to this as well, in that the GAA sought legal advice earlier in the week, which seemed to say that it doesn't have any discretion on this. So you'd wonder in some ways what the meeting is about then, if they don't have discretion on it.
Why were they taking legal advice? Who was going to sue them?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting approach to it. It's based on that Páirc Uí Chaoimh to be developed got a significant amount of state money, about 30 million euros, and there are EU laws around this and how you use this and whether you should make it open or not beyond GA-specific matches and events. So it's become that. But it was an unusual approach to take, because you almost go looking for legal advice as to why we shouldn't hold the game. I mean, in some ways, do we look at this in how we could hold the game? Personally, I think there's discretion in the rule book to do so. But also, I suppose, and Gary may pick up on this, there's the wider issue as well, whether we should even be looking at this in a legal way at all. And it is a charity event. It is a reflection of Cork sport as a whole and the contribution of Liam Miller and others. And do we see it in that way? And ironically, if you do, there may be loopholes within the rule book that allows you to do so and allows you to have, if you like, a festival of Cork sport and a celebration of the life of Liam Miller.
What was your reading of Gary from afar?
I thought some of the criticism of the GAA was unfair. Rules are rules, and I suppose it was a bit blunt, a response to just say, no, it can't go ahead here, because they're banned from allowing foreign sports into Páirc Uí Chaoimh. And yet, last year was part of the bid for the Rugby World Cup. So it seems to be coming out both sides of their same mouth. But I think that an awful lot of people are quick to criticise the GAA. The GAA, and I find myself once again, defending them. They give so much to the country, and they do so much, and yet all the papers are plastered with criticism about their behaviour and why their structure, the games, the Super 8s, and I feel a lot of it is unfair. They will meet. I think the sway of public opinion about this now will probably mean that the match will go ahead in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, legal issues or not, and then it'll all be forgotten about. And I hope that the people of Cork do turn out, and people of Ireland go down to Cork if they're so interested, for Liam's posthumous testimonial is what it really is. But at the same time, I can see it from the GAA's point of view. The rules are there, and it should have been done at Congress. There is an opportunity to change that. The Cork County Board, I believe, voted against allowing such a rule change. So it'll be
traditionally always have been unashamedly against opening up Croke Park, even in Rule 42 days. They've been one of the ones saying, no, this is our house and let's mind it. So, because Philip Lanigan raises that point, he's wondering just how amenable are the Cork County Board to all this?
Well, I suppose the answer is we don't know. Initially, they said yes, they were, and we take it at face value. And they said that, they got advice from Central, which is Croke Park, to say that the rule book is pretty clear on this. I think in an overall sense, and I would agree, and I'd pick up with Gary as well, I understand the wider policy here in terms of the GAA, in terms of developing its own grounds, because if you look at even throughout the 20th century, the state did very little for sport in Ireland. And if it wasn't for the GAA, there would be no sports facilities. And that's still the case in large parts of the country. So, and I see that, and also, if you compare to, say, the FAI or the IRFU, which has the international dimension, the GAA's strength is national, and it's with their infrastructure and all that. So I totally get that, and I totally understand that in that. But I suppose from this perspective, it's not a rival code issue, if you like. It's a charity event, so whether or not it should be held should be seen in that light. Yeah. But I do understand the wider position on that. But it's also interesting as well that this has been voted on in Congress on a few occasions, and the overwhelming number of delegates have said, well, they're happy with the rule as it is.
Yeah, because Philip Langan has a very good piece in the Mail, and he points out that obviously at Congress just gone, they voted about allowing international units of the GAA to open up their doors. So in different countries they can do that potentially, but for venues in Ireland that was rejected. And Lanigan asked the GAA president back in February, should the rule not be amended to allow the same latitude to units at home as well as abroad? And Horne's argument then was, we're dealing with different circumstances, and I don't see why there would need to be a relaxing of that rule at the moment. We've worked hard in this country to put our facilities together. We struggle at times to get local authorities to give us that extra bit of space that we need, and I think we'll hold our ground there. Again, I don't have a major issue with that. Maybe to some it seems a bit outdated and post-colonial and everything else. But when it comes to the Miller situation, it is so clearly a charity event. The likelihood of another, and touch wood, but of a Cork son dying young and a charity event coming around like this again in the next decade, 20 years, 30 years is remote, to say the least. So you just wonder on the GAA's part, could they not have seen how this would go down? And I agree with Gary, I think they'll row back and they'll let the event happen. But the irony is they'll get no credit, Yeah. It'll be, well, you were kind of bullied into it. So in the end, they'll have to back down and they'll still get no credit. And maybe you just think they should have got out ahead of this thing.
Interesting way of looking at it, and you would think that they must have advisors within their own groups that would have looked at that and come up with the same conclusion that you've just come up with, and why that advice wasn't given. Because you're absolutely right. If the game goes ahead, it will be in spite of the GAA rather than because of the GAA's magnanimous gesture, as it'll turn out to be. Yeah. And they could have got so much more credit for doing this if they just said, okay, let's make an exception here. But the facilities aren't there. They have their own structure in place that if you want to do this kind of stuff, February is the time that this has to be decided, not 2 or a month and a half before the event. So they do have it in place. The structure is there. I suppose, are the organisers a little bit guilty now? It's very easy for them to get public opinion to push this across the line. Should they not have gone earlier, is what I'm saying. Should they not have looked at this, and tried to go behind the scenes negotiations and just come out and say, and we're going to hold this in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, and by the way, the Cork County Board and the GAA up in Croke Park have given their blessing to this because it's such an exceptional event. And then everyone would have been happy.
Yeah, Tommy Conlon probably captures the most telling point, which is that in life, Liam Miller wouldn't have wanted the fuss, and in death, his grieving family most assuredly would not want it either. And he signs off by saying, for the present, it remains a troubling irony that a man who lived so privately in public is now at the centre of a public quarrel despite resting in the ultimate privacy of his final abode. That is the thing. It's just become a bit unseemly for everyone, and you've great sympathy for the Miller family, who I'd say just cannot believe this thing has dominated the airwaves for a whole week now and counting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you agree, Jack, that ultimately the GAA will bow down?
I'm not so sure because of that. The legal advice they got seems to back themselves into a corner on grounds of not having a discretion. I think they should, and I think there is actually a discretion on that, and I think they can look beyond that legal advice on this one-off reason. Looking at it in terms of a charity event like that. And I think one of the things that came out was, and you learn from the Newbridge Kildare saga as well, one of the things they had the legal advice statement, and at the end they made the gesture, which has to be acknowledged, that the corporate services, corporate grounds of Páirc Uí Chaoimh would be made available. Free of charge. Yeah. But of course, and that's fantastic and that's good, and maybe that's what's going to be discussed next week. But also, you have the situation then where the actual ground can be used but not the pitch, and you kind of go, well, look, maybe we just let them use Páirc Uí Chaoimh as a whole. Yeah. Conlon does have a good line where he says that this whole saga is a continuation of this culture war
with another act of self-sabotage by the monolith. Inside the castle walls, it's still perfectly logical to draft a statement saying the GAA is prohibited in rule ... etc., etc. Outside, this rule is about as relevant to GAA people as the Billings method is to a newlywed Catholic couple. So, on that note...
Fair enough.
Yeah. On GAA generally, Gary, you were struck, I think, based on your text message this morning, that you're flicking through as a casual enough GAA fan, and, geez, the game gets a good old kick in from everyone who's around.
I see the GAA as being a little bit of a, being kept within the on the right path by people like Colm O'Rourke and Joe Brolly, who write their columns every week, and they bash them down the path or try and direct the path that they would like them to take. And everyone's given out about everything. The Super 8s are supposed to increase interest. You have John Green writing in the Sunday Independent about the empty stadia that the games are being played in. This time to take it on the road is what he says, so that the Croke Park shouldn't be used for some less attractive games. Let them play, in their home venues, so they play in front of full stadia rather than. Croke Park can look very empty, even if there's 45,000 people there, and that's what's sad about it.
He talked about, on the one hand, I totally agree with him. He talked about almost a Pavlov's dog effect, where if you keep going to Croke Park and the events aren't very good, then quickly you start to associate it with not very good events. On the other hand, I do wonder about, Emlyn Mulligan for Leitrim never played in Croke Park.
Yeah.
And so if you reach the latter stages of the competition, then at some point as a player, surely your reward should be to play at Croke Park. Now, we can't engineer 80,000 people to turn up and the event and the prestige, but I think the GAA are trying to balance that. That's a player issue as well. Shouldn't you play, if you reach the Super 8s, shouldn't you get to play at Croke Park? Is it good for the sport? Is it bad for the sport? I see John Green writes about walking out of Croke Park lately a lot, thinking it was pretty boring on the whole.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, I'm from Limerick originally. I'd like to be walking out of Croke Park a lot and being bored. I'd like to be there, often as well. I think with John Green and also I think Colm O'Rourke as well, they talk about the Super 8s, the positioning of the Super 8s. So the initial part of the GAA Championships is effectively knock out with the back door, and then it kind of funnels into this league type situation, which is some of the thing they're talking about. The only thing I would say is, and Pádraig Duffy, when he introduced this and sponsored it, said it is an experiment. It's a 3-year experiment. We're hardly halfway there on the first year.
Weekend 1.5.
And we've said, no, this is no good. Let's see, even after this year, let's see about it in what can be done. I think Eamon Sweeney is very tough on Gaelic football and the style of it.
Game of Drones will bore us to death.
Yeah, so he's very tough on that. And he points also to other sports, rugby and others, that have been kind of more proactive in changing the rules. And I think that's a big point here, that there's a lot of criticism of Gaelic football, even though scoring averages are going up. There's a lot of criticism. Well, is there something that we can do better, in terms of rule changes? And I know from the AFL, they have had their lowest scoring season in 50 years, and they have immediately tried to enact a number of rule changes to decongest it, as they call it.
Right.
And they're very proactive in that. It's also kind of a PR thing as well, that, we're looking at the game, we're analysing the game, and we want to make things better. And there are various things you can do. And Joe Brolly mentioned some of them, but there are others that of people involved in the game will probably think about as well.
Yeah, the Sunday Independent have really gone after the game today. So O'Rourke's talking about dead rubbers loom and serial losers may progress. He talks about the nonsensical nature of the Super 8s, how it's rearing its head, that's the initial part of this experiment. Joe Brolly, he's talking about the worrying state of football can no longer be disguised by epic late summer battles, and he says that during the Kerry-Galway game last week, somebody should have made a public announcement to say, attention, this is an announcement on behalf of all GAA members. Could the players on both teams and their managements bear in mind that people are watching? He suggests a number of rule changes, everything from changing the kickouts and where players have to be, no passing back to the keeper, no passing back past the halfway line, no sweeper allowed in front of the full back, maybe play a 13-a-side game. Loads of rule changes being suggested. And Eamon Sweeney, I guess, Gary, to come back to your point that are we going over the top here, opens his column by wondering if Gaelic football is the world's most boring field sport. He says not yet, but it's getting there. Really tough criticism.
Yeah. Now, Joe Brolly has had these rule changes. He's been talking about them for years, and fully convinced of this is the way to go to make it a little bit more exciting. And it is all about excitement and entertainment. This is nothing to do with player welfare. It's nothing to do with making it a nicer tournament for the players themselves. It's all about us, the spectators and people who are turning up. That's what all this is for. And if people are voting with their feet and not coming to the games, well, then there's a problem with the games. And certainly if I go to a sporting event, I want to see points put on the board. I don't want to go to a Gaelic match where, as Richie was saying earlier, that you worry that the World Cup might get more points on, the World Cup final might have more points than a Donegal match. You don't want that, and people don't want it. I'm not educated enough to appreciate the nuances of a team keeping the ball for 5 minutes like Dublin can, and Donegal not coming out to challenge them. Yeah. That's an elite spectator that can appreciate that, not the run-of-the-mill spectator like me that might go to the odd game. But to be fair to the GAA, they've changed it. It's a long time since the knockouts. Now they've got the back door to keep people involved. People might say that was just to keep money rolling in, that there was more games, etc., etc. But there was an interest for the public there. Now, if your team got knocked out, you had another opportunity. And now they're changing it again to try and keep people invested in the competition right up until the end. And I think that's a great thing. Playing to empty stadia, well, then they've got to do something else to jazz it up, and that's for they've come up with a solution for that. But they are trying,
It gets, this debate gets very tetchy. So Sweeney's talking about the gormless conformists in sensible Ganseys with their incessant blather about innovation and motivation and sports psychology who love the current game because it's as dull as they are. They like to scoff at Brolly and Spillan's repeated assertions that modern day Gaelic football is terrible. They come out with that laughable line about the game evolving. Are you one of those conformists who's gormless in a sensible Gansey, or do you think the game's in trouble?
Oh, it's like a sensible Gansey. But I come from a hurling background, so I always think with Gaelic football, there's kind of a self-loathing there. It's Ireland's most popular sport, and the criticism is, I suppose, the criticism from people like Sweeney and Brolly is because they really care about it, and they really want to make it better, and they have certain views of how to make it better. And I think there are certain practical things you can do in terms of rule changes. I'd like to see the GAA be more proactive in terms of rule changes. God knows there's enough pre-season tournaments there that you could experiment with, but also you're going to, and this applies to counties that are traditionally called weaker counties. A tiered championship is the way to go. Sure. But so long as you support that tiered championship with the games in Croke Park, etc., like that. But it reminds me a bit in Australia at the minute, the National Rugby League has this kind of self-loathing element to it as well. They're always self-critical, and the chief executive came out with a Twitter handle of "Talk Up the Sport," and it would almost become a marketing campaign in itself. And I think Gaelic football can be really, really harsh on itself. There's some incredible athletes like Conor McGregor and that in it, and you have to see that. But something needs to be done now in terms of a dynamic assessment of the rules.
Okay.
The spectators too. Last week I had reason to be driving past Croke Park. The first game had started, but the second, so it was underway, and there were still spectators, thousands of spectators who were coming in for the second game, who were hanging around Drumcondra and Jones's Road area, but had no interest in going in to watch the first game, which always surprised me, because I would have thought that although your team is not involved, why not go for the entertainment? And if they're not going for the entertainment and they're there to support their county team, and they can get another game for free, that spoke volumes to me,
Yeah. No, I take your point. I do think the criticism is overstated. Attendances don't lie. I'll just point out, and it's nice that this has worked in my favour, there Galway is 8 points apiece after 25 minutes. So that's 16 scores in 25 minutes. Yeah. And if your attention span can't be held by that, well then look, what are we meant to do? Maybe we should set off fireworks and put in like tigers in the corner and see if we can get something going. There are good games and bad games in every sport. My God, we've sat through bad rugby games, soccer games. Like, this is the nature of quite often lesser teams trying to protect themselves go defensive. It's going to happen in every field sport.
An interesting Joe Brolly reports on the game last night from Tyrone. So he's writing a piece. You don't often see Joe write a piece on the game, but he spoke about Dublin holding the ball for a long period of time, and he counted 4 occasions where they held it for 5 minutes. 3 of them resulted in a point. And that's him looking at it with a nuanced eye of saying, well, maybe there is, they know what they're doing here. It's kind of a backhanded compliment, but he saw it as a criticism that they were boring for holding it for this time. But Jim Gavin's on the sideline saying that's exactly what I want you to do. You know?
Oh, absolutely.
Methodically pulling the opposition out of position, or they're losing concentration. That's exactly what they're doing.
Waiting until the gap arises.
I mean, in other sports, when there's a lot of passes put together and it finishes in a goal, we say, wasn't that magnificent?
Ticky-tacky,
Or you simply limit the number of hand passes, and therefore that they have to kick forward. You know, it's a simple change like that. And also, you talked about Kerry and Galway last week. Kerry played badly, and a feature of the sports pages this today is the pressure that's on Eamon Fitzmaurice is a huge thing. So sometimes teams play badly, and it results in a bad game.
So the golf then is in all the front pages. It's rare that golf gets that kind of attention, but you've Jordan Spieth leading, who's a big name player, you've McIlroy in contention, and you've Tiger Woods lighting it up yesterday, so it's right across the papers. And Shane Lowry's separated with his caddy as well. Philip Quinn's writing about that in the Mail. Paul Kimmage takes up the caddy route as well. Anything grab your eye here, lads?
Separated, that's an interesting choice of words.
By mutual consent? I don't know what the phrase is anymore.
He sacked him. It was interestingly, there are 2 big features on caddies. One by Philip Quinn in the Mail, and then Paul Kimmage has the Sunday Independent piece where he talks to a few of the caddies, and it's a strange occupation being a golf caddy. There can't be more lonely a job at times. And very vulnerable. You're very open. You were speaking about Jordan Spieth earlier, and at the Masters this year, I only watch golf twice. Some years, 3 times other years. So this year is the 3 times. The Masters, the British Open, Joe, I believe you're calling it now, yeah?
I just refuse to accept these people who bully people for calling it the British Open. Okay. You can call it the Open or the British Open, whatever you like.
So the Open, the Masters, and then the Ryder Cup is the only times I'll sit down and watch golf, and it's fantastic to watch. And yesterday was thrilling to watch all of those players. But when I was growing up in Bray, one of my next door neighbours played golf, and he's now a caddy on the circuit. It just strikes me as being hugely vulnerable.
Job security is not great.
And as Jack was saying earlier, you know, there's no pension in that, and it just is strange. But Paul's piece is great because it goes through the different caddies, and Darren Reynolds is the guy that I grew up beside, and he's Paul Dunn's caddy now. And I was telling Jack that Darren didn't travel out with Paul. Where did he win January, February this year? Was it Qatar or somewhere like that? It was some kind of competition. And Darren didn't go with him, and Paul performed extremely well. Darren missed out on his payday then, you know. I find it, I'm bemused by people who can live in that life, and they all travel around together. They're all exceptional golfers, I believe, all very talented. And yet they have come to the conclusion themselves that they're just not talented enough. And it's amazing to think that they will have done that but stayed in love with the sport. Because they must love it, even though it has chewed them up and spat them out and said, no, you're not good enough for us. But it still comes, they still go back to it. Very few other sports that would allow that.
Yeah, quite often the footballer returning from a big English club who hasn't quite made it as a youngster comes back and can't even look at the game. Yeah. Whereas these caddies can smell it and they're just so close to it. Paul talks to Dave McNeely, who people will know because he's been around a long time now. I think he's in his 60s. And he says to Paul at the outset, there's a book I'm planning to write, how I caddied for the winners of 14 majors, none of them with me. Yeah. So McNeely has worked with Harrington, various others, Nick Faldo, who he started off with. Quite amazing, really, that Faldo gave him a start when he knew nothing about caddying, to be honest. and various others who've won majors but never when McNeely was there. He says at one point, timing is everything. No kidding.
Yeah, they remind me a little bit of jockeys, whereby you can be lucky and get a good horse, but also you're at the whim of the owner or the trainer, and you maybe, if you like, jocked off. So it's a really good piece on the lifestyle of a caddy. Now, I must admit, from a sports law point of view, I wonder, do they have contracts? I doubt it. I doubt it very much.
It seems like that whole area has not moved with the times.
No, it's a very unusual relationship. But they as a group, they seem to accept that, and that's part of the practice. But it's an interesting thing whether or not they've organised themselves to respect their rights.
Yeah, he speaks to Ronan Flood as well, who sensed a big bit of resentment from the other caddies when he went out on tour in place of Dave McNeely with Harrington, saying Dave was very popular. I wasn't going to be flavour of the month for taking the job. I was also taking what a lot of the caddies believe was their job. Their attitude was, we've served our apprenticeship and you're dating Harrington's sister-in-law, but you'll find out that nepotism doesn't work here. I mean, it's worked out great for Flood, and he wasn't on the bag that long when Harrington won his 3 majors, so he must have thought to himself, this is pretty easy. Yeah. And that's just the luck, especially in golf when you can't control how your player's going to do. Darren Clark as well spoke to McNeely as well about Clark left his caddy off the bag and won a tournament early in 2011, and then 5 weeks later wins the Open with that new caddy, and it's just like, tough luck, what are you going to do? I remember being at a golf tournament and being sat beside 2 caddies. It was pretty wrong of me, but I couldn't not hear them. They were talking quite loudly, and they were like, it was like 8 o'clock in the evening having dinner on the night of the tournament, and honestly the 2 of them were just bitching about every other caddy on tour. Like proper, why is he on his back? Like he and as for him, he's the luckiest caddy out here. He is riding on those coattails. Why haven't we got that gig? I mean, they were just down on their luck, angry, and tough profession.
There's a nice little anecdote from David McNeely when he rang Faldo to try and pick up the bag, and Faldo says, right, I'll see you at 10 on Tuesday, make sure you have all the yardages done. Do you have a wheel, which is a yardage wheel? I don't know what that is, Joe. Do they walk and it just measures it out? Yeah. This is before GPS, obviously.
It's back in the 80s,
I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. I've just come from America, and he says I usually take public transport, but so there was some silence on the end of the phone as Faldo says, what have I just agreed to? But it all works out well in the end. But I can't imagine that they'd have contracts with their employer, but they're employees.
They agree a flat rate, and then the standard is 10% of a win.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you were Steve Williams, the very famous line is he was the highest paid
New Zealand
athlete in New Zealand for a time. So I mean, look, if your player wins a couple of million, you're doing just fine.
Yeah.
But it falls off. McNeely is still out there at 66 with Matt Wallace, and they were at the Open this week. Philip Quinn, interestingly, I haven't seen anyone else with this details. I'm sure maybe some others have it, but I think Quinn has spotted this, where he seems to have spotted the moment where Shane Lowry and Dermot Byrne on Thursday may have kind of realised things weren't going so well. He talks about the 9th hole where Lowry angrily rebuked Dermot Byrne over a club selection. He says that he doesn't know for sure, obviously, may have proved the tipping point for their 9-year relationship. Yeah. And they've been very close. Like, Lowry often talks about Dermo, and so he's going to look for a new caddy for his 4-week stint in the US, and that's 9 years together. I would think it's one of those relationships where they know it's been bubbling for a long time, and there's just a moment. Yeah. It's a lot of time to spend together as well. That's the other thing. Yeah,
absolutely. And I know from a journalistic point of view, and it's a very good article, but they do. He mentions it's a tipping point, so there obviously has been a build up there, and it's inevitable. But it's extraordinary. Like today, we're going to see the back 9 of the Open, one of the big, events in sport this year, and a key component, the caddy. I'm fascinated what their legal status is and all this as a participant, because they will be a key participant, particularly with the wind picking up as it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but Philip is right that Shane might have hit incorrectly, but then we'll still turn around to the caddy and blame him, and McNeely says about, he'd always stick to his guns. He'd always say, no, that was a 4-iron. It's actually your fault. You hit it incorrectly. Now that's pretty good, but if you've got an ego of a sportsman and your caddy is criticising you, that relationship won't last too long.
Power imbalance is just so horrific,
isn't it?
I can fire you, you can't fire me.
That's correct. So you'd wonder, whether obviously. Whether it's the caddy or the actual golfer themselves, who comes out worst of the breakup? Does the caddy then? Does another golfer say, "Oh, you caddied for Shane Larry. I'd really like you," or is he now persona non grata amongst the top 50 golfers in the world? Do they ring Shane for a reference? Saying, "What was this guy like?" It's a bizarre world.
Yeah, there's no science to that, I'd say. I'd say it could be as flimsy as, well, I chat to him the odd time when I see him on the putting green and we get on okay. Oh, you've just been fired? Do you want to... And then do I get rid of my current guy?
Domino effect.
We are reviewing the Sunday papers with thanks to Screwfix.ie, championing the trade with a choice of over 20,000 quality trade products. We'll have a halftime update on events at Newbridge in just a second. But moving on, you were struck, there's a piece on Sam Warburton's premature retirement at the age of 29, Gary. Sunday Times certainly has a piece about this anyway.
29, Stephen Jones writes a piece on Sam, and for Stephen Jones it's hugely complimentary. Of course it would be. When you look at Warburton's career, especially in a Lions jersey, where he has now led 2 unbeaten tours, and Stephen Jones does make the point that it was in all likelihood, if he had stayed fit, he would have been a contender to captain his 3rd tour, and no offence, but probably would have won sorry, he's going to South Africa. Yeah,
none of us are offended.
No, but they probably would win.
Yeah,
but he makes the point that he's a victim of his sport. So he put his body on the line and put his head where other people wouldn't put crowbars. That kind of complimentary usage of phrases to describe his career. And you just wonder, whether when he's 40 or 50 and he looks back and he says, well, maybe if I wasn't as brave as I was when I was on the pitch, I could have, gone a little bit further. If he was a little bit more smart and held back a bit.
I think Stephen Ferris talks about that as well, that he just wasn't a 70-80% man. Even if it was the Dragons away, just couldn't play rugby any other way other than 100%. And maybe he wonders the odd time, should I have played with a bit more pragmatism or picked my moments a bit more?
Yeah, and you have to feel sorry for him, with all of these injuries, and wish him the best with his whatever future career he has. It's very tough for someone at the age of 29 to find himself on the scrap heap, especially when what he's achieved in sport is probably not reflected in his bank balance at this stage in his life. So it's tough.
When you get a high-profile retiree like this, like Stephen Jones mentions Gareth Edwards, who said, that this could be the final push rugby needs for a major revision of its laws and, its safety procedures. The Professor John Fairclough is quoted, Welsh Rugby Union surgeon. He comes in saying rugby no longer the sport it once was. All this kind of stuff. Like, there can be an emotional response to one high-profile retiree at 29. Like, statistically, have things deteriorated that much in the last 5-6 years?
Yeah.
I was trying to think, because I knew when Warburton retired there would be inevitable articles about rugby and early retirees, and this is kind of something we need to look at. But it doesn't seem like it's gone crazy. It doesn't seem like we're seeing 5-10 players retiring in their late 20s every year or two at the moment. I don't know what the statistical data says.
No, but I suppose and it's even in Gaelic football, it's unusual to have players at an inter-county level playing into their 30s now, So, I mean, but one of the things about Warburton is, and I looked it up actually, they mentioned the Wales Online site that listed the 20 serious injuries he had. I mean, he had some incredibly serious injuries, and he was an incredibly brave player. But it's interesting, I think, with rugby, and this is what differentiates it in terms of these concussion injuries and all these from, say, the American sports is, rugby's well aware of the difficulties it has with the physicality of the game. And key medics within the sport are really pushing the research on this and trying to get the evidence-based research to push into the rule changes of it. And I recently gave a talk on concussion, the legalities of concussion down in the University of Limerick, but it was mainly sports medics were there. And a lot of sports medics who had played rugby and said, actually, we need to depower the game a bit. We need to go back a bit in terms of the future of the sport. And it makes a mention, Stephen Jones makes a mention, it's coming into the French top 14 as well, about substitutes, and how you see now after about 50 minutes, the whole front row can be changed, and you've got all these big guys coming on. And do we need to look at these kind of things? And I think, with the Warburton thing, it's not a legal thing. It's a medical and regulatory thing. I think the sport needs to talk to people like Sam Warburton and say, well, reflecting on your career, what do you think? And I think that's part of the process as well. And they are well aware of that. I think it's a big threat. I know in Australia, rugby union's in big trouble in terms of participation, and particularly in terms of youth participation at school level, because a lot of parents are going, okay, we want our child to be involved in contact sport, maybe rugby isn't the thing. So it's it's an issue for rugby as a whole. But I must admit, I always liked watching Warburton. He was a really intelligent back row player, annoyed Ireland on many occasions, and I wish him very best in his retirement.
Why was the NFL legally liable on the concussion issue, and why would rugby not be liable for whatever injuries or trends we see in the next generation?
Well, the NFL did a deal with its former players, so without admission of liability.
Okay.
And essentially, the figures are unbelievable. A third of retired NFL players have measurable brain damage as a result of playing the game, and they did a deal. And the players wanted to take the money and didn't want to fight it because of the medical care and cost that they need. So it was an incredible deal in that. They think it's going to fall apart. It was about $1 billion US dollars, but the NFL revenue is $14 billion US dollars a year. So did they pay off a problem? Yeah. Yes, it did.
On the injury front, I remember when Brian O'Driscoll was retiring, one of the papers did just showed a picture of him standing there and listed all his injuries, from his neck injury, shoulder injury, all the way down to his hamstring and ankle injuries. And it was shocking how many injuries he had as a result of the sport. But sometimes you can just be unlucky. You can just be unlucky on the sporting pitch and just go over and tear your cruciate and have the same bad luck, the week you come back having rehabilitated and tear it again. And we see that time and time again in soccer. So there are unlucky sports people out there, but some of Sam Warburton's problems seem to be attritional, and that's the difference.
So these chronic injuries is a point they're looking out for, and that's something. But to be fair, rugby is very, very aware of that. But it also feeds into this debate about the head-high tackles and tackling people in the air, where you've got some commentators saying that the sport has gone soft. Well, you have to play safe before that. That's what I think.
But still, you see these tackles in the air. The fullbacks going up or the wingers going up against one another in rugby union, and it's. If they're touched in the air or they're put off, it's a yellow card or red card for the player that does it, and it's really strictly enforced. And then you switch over to the NFL, American football, and you get a wide receiver who's up in the air, and the guys are coming in absolutely hell-bent on him not hitting the ground properly, and they land on their head. And for a sport that is paying out $1 billion, to allow tackles like that is extraordinary. So they're wide apart in how they judge the game. And again, it's all about spectator excitement. The NFL are very interested in, it looks great on the telly when they're hit like that. Sure, aren't they wearing the pads? Whereas the rugby seem to be well ahead of them in that sphere.
There's no doubt.
I'll pause you for one quick second. We have to go over to Carnoustie. Neil Tracy with the latest, Neil.
Yeah, Joe, Jordan Spieth and Xander Schauffele have just teed off there now. Schauffele just left the fairway, probably perfect position because we have a back right pin on the first tee, while Jordan Spieth, he made eagle here yesterday, but he probably has put himself in a slightly difficult position. He's just gone to the right, went for an iron today off the tee, but he's in the right, kind of first cut of rough. Rory McIlroy, not really going well for him so far now. He bogeyed the second hole, left his second shot short right, and then overhit a chip and missed a 6-footer, lipped out. So he's now 4 under and 5 back. And he also missed a big birdie chance on the first hole. It was a perfect drive just left of the fairway where you want to be, but he left his pitch short, 25 feet for birdie, just off the green, and that rolled up short, so he missed his chance. Of the other movers so far, Tommy Fleetwood has got up to 6 under. He's 1 under for his round on the after a birdie on the first, 19 feet. It was a great putt, while Eric Van Rooyen had been up as far as 6 under. He's dropped back to 5 now after a bogey on 6. Tiger Woods, he missed a fairly makeable birdie chance, about 7 feet on the opening hole. He hit iron off the tee, most accurate guy in the field this week, found the fairway but missed that 7-foot putt. And same with Francesco Molinari, he made a par on the opener as well. Kevin Kisner has a few feet left here for a par on the first hole as well. Ended up in one of the greenside bunkers, but he has got out of it well, and just a few feet to save his par. But as I say, Jordan Spieth and Xander Schauffele have just teed off 9 under par. Kevin Kisner, he has just made that par on the first, so they remain 3 clear of the field. Tommy Fleetwood, one of the movers, up to 6 under par.
Lovely stuff. Thanks, Neil. So there we are. Leaders going out. 3 of them on 9 under. Woods still on 5 under through 1, and McIlroy, as you heard, the bogey early on, so he's dropped back to 4 under through 3. We're going to take a very quick break. We're back with more on the papers. We'll also check in with Dave at Newbridge, where it's half time. A really good first half. Kildare 10 points, Galway 11 points is the half-time scoreline.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Thanks to Screwfix.ie, championing the trade with a dedicated call centre.
The Pat Kenny Show.
On tomorrow's programme, as well as all the breaking news, we talk to the unions about the Ryanair strike, we hear about the growing trade in deadly drugs on social media, and our expert will be answering all your queries about how you, not your baby, can get a good night's sleep.
The Pat Kenny Show.
With MasterCard.
Tomorrow morning at 9.
On News Talk.
Every ultimate experience Ireland has to offer is always within reach with a 182 BMW. The ultimate bowl of chowder, seasoned with Atlantic salt air, the ultimate swim spot, even the ultimate scenic shortcut that happily takes way, way longer. Experience the ultimate with a 24-hour test drive from your local BMW retailer. Because owning your new BMW is always within reach. Visit bmw182.ie.
Now we say what is all better must be better for all. Where? Oh, hi. Full tank of fuel good on pump 4? Yeah.
The fuel revolution has begun at Apple Green with Fuel Good, our most advanced fuel ever that's yours at no extra cost.
The woman on pump 6 has just joined the revolution. Yes, you, madam.
Apple Green, low fuel prices always.
Bruce Betting are one of Ireland's leading bookmakers. Download the Bruce Betting app from the App Store and our new Android app in the Google Play Store to see why we're giving you more. Bruce Betting, in store, online, and now on your phone. Please gamble responsibly. See dunlewy.net.
We all want to build a better health service, and to do that, we need to hear from people using our services day to day. All adults who finish to stay in a general hospital during May are being invited to share their experience by taking part in the National Patient Experience Survey. Patients will be contacted after they leave hospital and invited to take part. For more information, visit patientexperience.ie. From the HSE, the Health Information and Quality Authority and the Department of Health.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Thanks to Screwfix.ie, championing the trade with a choice of over 20,000 quality trade products.
Welcome back. So latest in Newbridge, 11 points to 10 in favour of Galway at half-time. We will have full analysis of that game from Ray Silk, who's there alongside Dave McIntyre. We're past midway through reviewing the Sunday Papers. Gary O'Toole, Olympian, orthopaedic surgeon here in studio, and Jack Anderson, who's home from Australia for a couple of weeks, is Professor and Director of Sports Law at Melbourne Law School, both here in studio. It's been a really good time for Irish athletics. That's reflected to a point in the papers. You both saw some pieces. There's a really nice interview that Shane McGrath's done with Frank Greeley, and there's a piece on Leon Reid that you spotted, Jack. The Frank Greeley piece you in front of you there, Gary?
Yeah. It's first of all, I'm always intrigued when I pick up the Mail on Sunday and read Shane McGrath. He must be the hardest working journalist there is. You know, some weeks he'd be responsible for 5-6 contributions to the supplement
across different sports as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So shout out for Shane, really, and this is his paper review, so it's to pay him his credit. He does some great stuff. But Frank really was a runner who very successful runner, went to college in the States, to East Tennessee University, I believe, and then came back, and he started the Irish Runner magazine, and despite people telling him it would never work and how could you do that, he made it work for himself, and is obviously still in love with the sport, which is wonderful to see, because often, and someone said it to me last week as well, with running, you know, everyone's getting fit now. You know, you see them all out running, and this person said to me, he said, do you see that cyclist there? And I said, yeah. He says, what do you notice about that cyclist? Not much. He says, well, he seems to be having fun. You say, well, yeah, genuinely. And then he says, do you see that runner there? I said, yes. And you look at their face, it's contorted in agony, and they're running down the road. It just seems to be very different. And for an athlete to come through an elite level of athletics and remain in love with the sport, it's wonderful to see, and that's what happened with Frank Greeley. I didn't really know him. He was just ahead of my time when I would have been getting interested in sport, so I wasn't aware of the background, but I wish him well in his retirement now, and hope all goes as well for him in retirement as it did in his working life.
Very open in this interview as well. Yeah. Like, men of that generation don't often just say things like, I've had the challenges of depression and alcoholism, and just be straight up about it. And it seems like there was a 2-decade battle almost. But the Irish Runner magazine, an unbelievable success. I'm kind of with the people who told him at the time, this is madness. Like, how in a population country this size is a running magazine, such a niche thing, is that going to do well or even survive? And he ploughed on anyway. I don't think economics was really his concern, and the in 2007 then it's been taken on by Athletics Ireland, so its future is secure, and he's been the editor up until last couple of months, so it's actually an incredible success story. It is
a success story. It's a great piece because it kind of goes back to the 70s and the American scholarship kids. So he goes to, I think it's East Tennessee University. He has some fantastic adventures there, and but
someone spikes his drink with LSD,
and he ends up drinking with the author of Deliverance, which, you know, I'm sure happens a regular occurrence in Tennessee, but it's one of them, the classic stories where, and we see it in football, we see it in so many sports, the young talented athlete, it doesn't really work out for him in that harsh American system, and therefore, you know, that affects him personally. So he returns then to Ireland. He has this friendship with Con Hoolan, which inspires him in terms of journalism. I love the reference to the 1979 World Cross Country Championships at Limerick Racecourse, which was the first sports event apparently that I was at. I have no memory of it.
Right, okay.
Not even John Tracy slipping. And then he goes on. But it's interesting, he's still involved. And there's two initiatives there called the Daily Mile, which begins with children, you know, running, just spending 15 minutes a day running. And the transformative effect that has. And it's an interesting one for athletics. And we've seen the development of Park Run and all this kind of, where you have people involved in running who love it, who like it, but not in a competitive structured sense. And how does someone like Athletics Ireland get into that? And such a beneficial sport. And it ties in really well with the success that we've had in athletics recently at underage level and right up, as Gary's pointed out, to Phil Healy.
Yeah, there's a great picture of Phil Healy, by the way. That's worth mentioning.
Yes. It's lovely when you have a piece that is accompanied by good photography. And when I was competing, you know, and Billy Stickland is still around, thank God, but always looking for a different way of doing things. And I was just saying to Jack that my daughter cut this out for me this morning, and she's cutting out Phil Healy, and she managed to cut her hair out the top and her foot down the bottom. And she was looking at her and she goes, why is she so happy? And it's lovely to see someone, obviously the top of her sport at the moment and improving and doing so well. And again, Shane has spoken to Phil Healy about how she's performing now and what the difference is. But she just seems. It's on the up, Irish athletics, it seems to be anyway, with the younger athletes, the underage athletes doing so well last week. And hopefully it continues, because we're a long time waiting for the next Derval O'Rourke or Sonia O'Sullivan.
It is difficult to get into athletics when you don't have someone to root for.
It is. It's very difficult.
You do need that someone.
Yeah, and I saw during the week that the women's steeplechase world record was broken by 8 seconds, and whenever, God forgive me, but when I see something like that happen at a world level, someone breaking a world record by 8 seconds, the first thing that flashes into my mind, well, that's someone's sport that I just won't be watching then, because it's unbelievable.
Yeah,
really unbelievable.
Yes.
And that's what athletics suffers from. No one should be breaking world records by 8 seconds, surely.
Yeah, yeah.
That's another day's discussion.
Yeah,
sure is. Greeley is involved with Daily Mile. It is quite an interesting thing. I guess it's a symptom of modern life. I mean, a couple of generations ago, you just couldn't imagine us being in this scenario. But this kind of was given life by a Scottish school teacher in 2012 when she asked her class to run.
Yeah.
And basically discovered none of you can run.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the concept is fairly simple. Daily Mile, children run for 15 minutes a day. So this arrived in Ireland in April. Castleknock and Blennerville outside Tralee pioneered it. And now it seems that over 170 schools are going to be involved from September, which is kind of cool. I mean, what a simple, easy thing to do. Everyone just run for 15 minutes. Because, I mean, most kids aren't allowed to run in the yards anymore for insurance reasons.
Yeah, that's a simple idea, and it goes towards, how we view in Ireland physical education and where we place it in the education process.
Yeah.
Well, here's a simple way of starting to do so. And I suppose hopefully it'll fill up along and bring more into the sport. It's such a competitive sport. I know we've had great success at under 18 and under 20 level, but such a global sport, such a competitive sport, has its various problems, and I hope that the success we have, they can move it on now to senior level.
The run a mile thing is really important, because in the Sunday Independent today, outside of the sports pages, they spoke to Professor Donal O'Shea, who weighed his first over 50 stone patient who came into his obesity clinic, and this was a young man weighing over 50 stone. The weighing scales couldn't weigh him. So when you've got that kind of obesity, in the population, it's very easy to accept obesity as the norm. And if this is how you stop obesity from getting a foothold into society, because if you don't start young, it's very hard to get them back again. And the eating habits, the exercise habits, you can get them and form them as an 8, 9, 10-year-old, and you will not be able to form them as a 20, 21 or 22-year-old when you realise how important it is. So it's just worth making that point, because sport is not all about Rory, it's not all about Jurgen Klopp, it's about actually this 21-year-old that's weighing 50 stone and preventing that, and that's what sport is at the end of the day most useful for.
Because aren't we on track to be the most obese nation in Europe very soon?
Yeah, we're very soon. Yeah.
Is that the 2020 or 2025?
Yeah, we're heading in that direction. OECD, which measures it, we're shockingly high on the list in terms of childhood obesity, and so sport, but a diversity of sports as well. That we don't one track children into certain sports. Play as many sports as you can, and get them exposed to as many, and tie them in with good habits.
Yeah.
It's a hugely important thing that sport can do for Ireland.
And just one segue on the Frank Greeley piece, this East Tennessee university that he went to. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, you should look up Netflix, Last Chance U, which is also a university in Tennessee, about the people trying to get into the American collegiate football program, that they take a sabbatical in this school for a year. Last Chance U, it's extraordinarily interesting.
It's their lottery ticket, really. That's what they're competing for.
Oh, yeah.
It's their life,
Just to get to college.
Yeah, I think actually one of the guys from one of their first 2 seasons is on OTBAM this week, actually, so you might keep an eye out for that. Parents, if your kids come home and they're being asked to take part in the Daily Mile and the kid says to you, I don't want to do it, do not write them a letter getting them off for some made-up reason. They're 8, they're made to run, they'll be fine. Because that can be the worst thing. The parents start giving them notes and then boom, it's done. Domino effect. Well, if he's not doing it, I'm not doing it. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's correct. So,
shove them out the door. You wanted to mention a piece with Leon Reid.
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with Leon Reid.
Yeah, Leon Reid is a sprinter, 200-metre sprinter, and I was notionally working at the Commonwealth Games this year, and he came 3rd in the Commonwealth Games representing Team GB. But he is in the process of transferring to Ireland. He's a very interesting story. He'd been in and out of 14 foster homes by the time he was 15. His connection to Ireland is his Belfast mum, Paul Rowan's story in the Sunday Times. His Belfast-born mother, Annie Marie, had 7 children and a drug problem, which led to the intervention of social services. He started then as a teenager running in Bristol, and he was lucky enough to meet a lecturer in the University of Bath called Claire Russell, who's mentioned in this. She's from Enniscorthy in County Wexford, and she kind of helped him and fostered him and helped his athletics career. He's fast. He's very, very fast, and he's very, very good. And it's a very interesting story. 2 things from it. There's a kind of a legal issue. The IAAF, which is the world governing bodies for athletics, has had a problem with transfers. It's had a problem with certain countries essentially buying talent. So you have some of the Gulf states will buy talent in usually Kenyan. So
Turkey have bought in there.
Yeah, and they have. So there's a lot of that going on. So they've put a kind of a stay on that, which may affect him. But also, there is a mention that not everyone in the Ireland team is overly delighted with that. Whether that's just a competitive rival thing, it's another thing. So it's a very interesting story. There's a lot of good news stories for Athletics Ireland, and this guy may be one to watch in the future.
What were you doing at the Commonwealth Games?
I was the Court of Arbitration for Sport arbitrator, because technically I was neutral at the. Yeah, so we didn't have anything. We thought we had something to do with this 200-metre, as there was a lane change which ruled out the gold medalist. But and that's, to be honest, that's how I came to notice Leon Reid, because he was bumped up to 3rd.
Oh, right. Okay. Very good.
Court of Arbitration for Sport is this remote thing I don't know anything about. It comes up all the time, mention it all the time. Yeah. We might talk to you about it sometime. You can.
Yeah. I'm kind of there is it's a kind of World Supreme Court for Sport. Yeah. And the Secretary General always tells me not to say too much on media about it, because there's always cases going on about it. But it's a fascinating area of law and sport. But sometimes it does depress you, some of the issues that comes up in terms of doping and that. It's still.
Does it have its own full-time judges, and it's a big industry all in itself? Or?
No, the judges like me are part-time, so you are appointed on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
So in Australia, I hear a lot of cases on the papers, so both sides will send you the papers and you decide the dispute.
But you're not a judge in any other aspect of law?
No, I'm not a judge in any other aspect of law.
Okay, so actually just professors in law are the judges in CAS?
Well, there will be QCs on it, there will be actual judges on it as well, but it's a wide range of people who have an interest in law and sport.
Right, okay. All right, and so the headquarters are in?
The headquarters, as is with all of these sporting bodies, it's in Lausanne in Switzerland. Too many of these bodies are in Switzerland, but that's another point that we'll come up with. But it's interesting, and it obviously played a big role with the Russian doping saga that's ongoing as well. And all of these disputes end up in the
CAS. Sure. A very final quick one then, as Galway lead Kildare by 12 points to 11, 45 minutes on the clock at Newbridge. The kicking of the score, I don't think it's coming back around. Oh, it has. Beautiful. Curled right in. 13 points to 11 Galway, 45 minutes on the clock. Very quickly then, last kind of 2, 3, 4 minutes. Eamon Sweeney is looking on at Conor McGregor, buddy with Vladimir Putin. Didn't like what he saw. Sweeney seems to think a lot of people thought it was fine and thought, oh, go on, Conor, you ledge. Anyone I talked to thought it was fairly ridiculous, to be honest. I don't think many people were in favour of Conor McGregor hanging out with one of the worst people in modern day politics.
No, and don't see where the connection came from, but obviously he was a VIP guest of his over there at the World Cup final, and he's in danger of being a parody of himself in many respects. And he gets several comments. Eamon comes down pretty hard on him, which I think is appropriate enough. There is some publicity being garnished now within the papers for Conor McGregor. You get the feeling that once this court case in New York is settled, that the bandwagon will start again, and it's likely that his next opponent will be from that neck of the woods. So maybe Conor was there just trying to pump up publicity in advance of this announcement for his next fight, where he goes into Russia perhaps to fight. But outside of the sports pages, Ciara O'Connor has a commentary piece on him, and she's pretty scathing about Conor McGregor, and I think.
What's what she's saying? I didn't actually see that piece.
Well, she says last week Conor McGregor, 24.4 million Instagram followers were treated to a photo of him with Putin. Yes, that Putin. If you thought Rory McIlroy playing golf with Trump was bad, look away now. So she just cannot understand this. She can't understand, why he would go there, why he would endorse Putin when there's so much wrong, allegedly. With Putin and the regime in Russia. And sports people can be guilty sometimes of not seeing the wood from the trees. Rory came out and spoke about why he played golf with Donald Trump. He admitted that there was a fascination there. He wanted to see what it was going to be like. But to be putting your arm around Vladimir Putin, who is responsible for, allegedly, to keep it legal, allegedly responsible, for.
I don't think Putin's going to sue us, so far away.
The poisonings in the UK, for the atrocities on his borders, for invading countries next door to him, and you go and you think that this guy's a legend. He's far from a legend, and. I just think it's that, to me, Conor McGregor. It just wasn't. It doesn't sit comfortably with me, and it shouldn't sit comfortably with Conor McGregor. And he just doesn't seem to care.
I was wondering that. I was wondering if this, when you saw him tweet, this guy's one of the great leaders and all the rest of it. I was wondering is this just gross ignorance on McGregor's part? Like, he just hasn't taken the time to follow the media or look into what Putin's done, or if actually it was not ignorance, but just I don't care. I still think he's a bit of a legend, and I'm aware of everything he's done, but I'm going to override it. I couldn't quite work out. I mean.
Well, which one would be better for you?
Well,
that he's ignorant, that he doesn't know who Putin is?
Neither's good for sure.
That he's using Putin as some kind of who's using who here? Is Putin using McGregor? Or is McGregor using Putin? You don't have to go very far. In Ireland, we have a Taoiseach that's breaking down boundaries, who will be legendary, and who other countries look at and say, this guy is, admirable for his stance that he's taken on things. And you don't see Conor McGregor putting his arm around Leo Varadkar saying this guy's a legend, because Leo Varadkar wouldn't have it. It's just, and they're similar people in their egotistical behaviour, and it just annoys me to see him terrible like this.
I came down on the side of ignorance, actually, because I just thought to myself, if you sat down and said to him, here's the 15 reasons just off the bat why you shouldn't have done it. Right here, let's go through these. I think he would have said, "Ooh, yeah, no, maybe I don't need to do that." So I came down on ignorance, but geez, you got to be pretty ignorant to not know much about Vladimir Putin in 2018.
Yeah, I think the interesting point of the piece as well was about Putin and about a fellow journalist reaction. Sweeney points out about this fellow journalist reactions to the World Cup itself, and how positive it was about Russia, and how unquestioning certain people were about it. I mean, it's the oldest thing in sport, this process of image laundering, where someone will try and launder their image through an association with sport. And ironically, at the end of the piece, Eamon mentions Muhammad Ali and how said, well, he stood up but actually there were people backing Muhammad Ali who were using him as well for image laundering purposes. So this mix between sport and politics. But yes, of course, you don't want to be pretty ignorant not to know the consequences of your action here, and I think it's been called out.
Because he called him a great leader as well. Yeah. Like, he didn't just put up the picture and no words. Like, he really went for it. It was a proper endorsement of this guy.
Yeah, and I mean, sport in the last 4 or 5 years has been dominated by, in some ways, Putin, from the Sochi Games, the Winter Games, right up to the World Cup.
Yeah, it's true.
It's been dominated in so many ways. Leave aside the politics of it. So, yes, Eamon Sweeney's speech encapsulates all that.
If there were, as Ciara O'Connor says, and I'll quote her, if there was ever a photograph that screamed fragile masculinity, this would be it. You know, that two bloated narcissists thrilled with themselves. Of course, nothing is new under the sun, and Putin is following a noble tradition of tyrannical leaders aligning themselves with hyper-masculine sportsmen. It's just, he should just get on with his sport and stop all this nonsense. But then yet it's the nonsense that brings in the 24.4 million Instagram followers that he has. It's awful. Awful stuff.
Yeah, okay. On that note, thanks very much for coming in.
You can go now.
No, thoroughly enjoyed it. Gary O'Toole, Olympian orthopaedic surgeon. Jack Anderson, Professor and Director of Sports Law at Melbourne Law School. Safe travels back to Melbourne. Thanks very much for coming in. I know we check in with you occasionally from afar, we'll keep on doing that. Yeah, Kildare 12 points, Galway 14 points, Kildare down to 14 men as well, so the writing potentially on the wall for them. We'll take a very short break.
Off the Ball on News Talk. Tech Talk with Jess Kelly.
Coming up this week, we go behind the scenes at Goodwood Festival of Speed to get insight into the future of transportation. We meet the Irish design team who built the Future Lab and, of course, answer your tech questions.
Tech Talk with Jess Kelly.
Download the podcast now or tune in this evening at 6.
On News Talk.
Bruce Betting are one of Ireland's leading bookmakers. Download the Bruce Betting app from the App Store and our new Android app in the Google Play Store to see why we're giving you more. Bruce Betting, in store, online, and now on your phone. Please gamble responsibly. See dunlewy.net.
Can I get you some drinks while you're waiting?
Just some water, please.
Still sparkling or tap?
Tap. You know what? I'll have the sparkling.
Ooh, look out. Somebody recently saved 10% on his car insurance with 123.ie.
And bring me your finest basket of bread.
Treat yourself a bit with 10% off car insurance. Get a quote online at 123.ie today and we'll give you 10% off your car insurance. It's that simple. 123.ie. Simple is smarter. Acceptance criteria, T's and C's apply. 123 Money Limited Trading as 123.ie is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. RSA Insurance Ireland DAC provides 123 car insurance. New policies only. Bye.